What is anxiety? It can be a state of agitation, restlessness, or fear. Anxiety certainly attacks the person physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It looks forward at the uncertainty. It looks to the potential loss. The biblical term to be anxious literally means to tear oneself apart. Anxiety comes when thoughts in our minds and feelings in our hearts pull in different directions and tear us apart. The mind thinks about problems, and these feelings weigh on the heart, creating a vicious cycle that destroys our emotional state. Our mind tells us that we shouldn't worry, but often we can't control the anxiety in our hearts. Before we can enjoy peace, we have to break this cycle of anxiety. It is possible that Jacob was plagued with anxiety, much like this, when we read in Genesis chapter 32. After 20 years had passed, he was going to see his brother Esau again, after stealing his most prized possession. He'd stolen Esau's birthright and the blessings that went along with it. And he was now faced with the decision of allowing his emotions and fear to cause him to run, or to face that fear. When faced with great conflict, we can run around desperately in anxiety as well, or we could stop to pray. Let's see what Jacob did. Okay, so in Genesis 32, chapters 1 through 21 read, "Now as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Jacob said when he saw them, 'This is God's camp.' So he named that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He also commanded them, saying, 'Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight.' The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, 'We came to your brother Esau, and furthermore he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him.' Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies. For he said, 'If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape.' Jacob said, 'O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, Return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant, for with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sands of the sea, which is too great to be numbered.' So he spent the night there. Then he selected from what he had with him a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, 'Pass on before me and put a space between droves.' He commanded the one in front, saying, 'When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, To whom do you belong, and where are you going, and to whom do these animals in front of you belong? Then you shall say, These belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he also is behind us.' Then he commanded also the second and third and all those who followed the droves, saying, 'After this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, Behold, your servant Jacob also is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face, perhaps he will accept me.' So the present passed on before him, while he himself spent that night in the camp." And so we have 3 things today to talk about. And the first one is that Jacob was confronted by his past mistakes. In this life, none of us are perfect, and Jacob was far from perfect. And that's actually a beautiful thing in the Bible, that we can see the people even with their flaws. And so we know that Jacob had lied to his father and deceived his father and had taken away his brother Esau's birthright, which also had blessings accompanying the birthright. And so he'd stolen that, and it's possible his brother might actually want to take his life. Jacob fled from his house when he was younger because of the possibility that his brother would kill him or hurt him. And so now he was preparing for the worst. They say that time heals all wounds, but it's not necessarily certain. His brother could still be very bitter. His brother could still be very angry with him. And he could actually even be worse and have festered over 20 years and thought that this man, his brother, had ruined his life. And so he, not knowing exactly what was happening, he was preparing for just the worst possible outcome. And even so, he was dividing his groups of people into two groups so that one might be able to be saved. And I thought this was really interesting because all of us have this as we walk the Christian life. It's possible that we have made mistakes prior to our becoming Christians, but even as Christians, we might still make mistakes. And there's times where we're haunted by those mistakes, or maybe I can't speak for everybody, but I know that I have times where I think about, oh no, I did this thing in the past and it might come back to bite me. And the beauty of this, though, is that knowing as Christians in the Bible, there's this promise. The Apostle Paul says in Romans 8:1, it says, "Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." It's not to say that there might not be consequences in this life or repercussions for what we've done. You might reap what we sow in some instance. But at the end of it all, we know that in Christ Jesus, there is no condemnation before God. God is not holding that against us anymore. And we know that we can still be with God in paradise and in heaven. The second thing then is that Jacob prayed and asked God for advice. So what can you do when you're terrified, when you're anxious, when you're worried about the future? You can run, you can try to fight, or you can ask God for advice. And Jacob here prayed and asked God for advice. And so no plan, no matter how good, is complete and effective without God's counsel. When you feel anxious, when you are worried about the future, talk to God. Put your need, your anguish, and your anxiety in His able hands. When you're faced with your worst fears, go to God and humbly tell Him that you are afraid and you're anxious. And any plan you may have, leave it in His hands. Give it over to Him. Basically saying, God, like Jesus did in the garden, take this cup from me if it's your will. And most importantly, Jacob here trusted that God is in control of everything. It's easy for us to focus on what we can do and what maybe others can do, the palpable or the physical things in this world, but it's most important to trust in the creator of all things and not the creation. And third, Jacob believes in God's promises. So here we return to the basics of the Christian life. How will we seek the work of God? How will we seek what He has done, what He will do? Well, we have to read His word. And right there in His word are His promises. You will not know them unless you read His word. Jacob remembered the promises God had made him previously, and he told God about them because he was telling God that he believed Him. And you know what? He slept that night. His anxiety no longer took control over him because he gave those things over to his rock, God. And so the conclusion here that we can get is our feelings are not necessarily reality. And that goes both ways. There's times where we might feel utter confidence or utter happiness, but things could be going actually terribly and we don't see it. Or on the contrary, we could think that things are going terribly, but really they're not. And so our lens and our way we look at the world, the way we are viewing the world, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the way God is seeing the world. So we have to come to God so that He tells us what reality actually is, what's actually going on. We can't be dominated by our emotions. God is in control of all circumstances, no matter how bad, difficult, or catastrophic they may be. Let God take control of your emotions. Don't believe what your emotions tell you. Believe what God says in His word. Believe the promises of God and see how He works as He has always done. Anxiety is another way of depending on yourself instead of depending on God. And so I thought maybe to close, I can give you some homework. Read God's cure for anxiety in Matthew 6:25-34, which are Jesus' words to His disciples. And I hope this reflection finds you well, and that if you are experiencing anxiety, that you can rest on the promises of God. You can rest on the rock. That when the storms come, that God is our rock and He is in control and nothing catches Him off guard. God bless and see you soon.